It's been a couple weeks since we finished the prep for the stone veneer, and we have had a ton of rain this summer. The masons had to move on to a different job that was less weather dependent, but now we've got a little bit better weather and they're back today. We're finally going to start putting some stone on. So hopefully by the end of today, we'll have at least a couple pieces up that we can start seeing how it's going to come together.
Picking up where the prep video left off, we'll be adhering this natural stone that is quarried and split into thin veneer slices. We have special pieces to wrap around corners, and the walls will get topped off with a natural stone ledge. We hired a mason and his helper hourly to start the first course so we could watch and get the hang of it. This allowed us to help as we could to keep up the pace and work on the evenings and weekends by ourselves. Overall, we think this saved us money on labor, we were able to maintain better control of quality, and we learned a new skill in the process.
We decided not to do the whole full parge and scratch coat and then adhering the stone. That's sort of the common practice, but what happens is that creates a cold joint. So I've found from listening to both these masons and some other things that I've read online recommended that if you can do basically applying stone as you go with the wet mortar, that's the best case scenario because it's a full solid bond. There's no cold joint in between, and it's a much stronger connection. Let's check out what's going on out here. Looking good. Got some makeshift tile spacers in. That's engineering right there. Using what you got, I love it. This is our trim detail out front. We'll have this is just a mock-up piece of 1x4 that we'll screw on with some Cortex screws, but we're leaving a little bit of a gap that we'll fill with a flexible sealant that matches the grout color. And then the idea is you leave the joint back enough that you can come back with grout after the fact.
And being you want a white looking grout, right?
Lighter gray, yeah.
By the time we're done this wall,
yep.
So dry a lighter gray. You told me if you want that or
okay.
That type S.
That'll be good. Yeah, maybe we could even mix just a little bit of type S by itself up to see how that dries.
Yeah. That mud's wet and it pushes in behind that screen and it makes a better suction and it's not a cold joint.
Right.
We're back at it this morning working on the masonry. We're working on the north wall, trying to get as much of this done today as we can. I'm going to go ahead and show you what the guys have gotten done this morning. Here's one of the corners that is pretty much complete. We just have to start working on that ledge. You can see the stone has a lot of gray tone, but also there is some brown tones as well. The guys were initially trying to keep all of the stones at the same depth because the stones are varying in thickness, but we decided to scrap that idea and kind of give it a more natural look by just going with the thickness of the stone as it is, and it's turning out pretty good. It may make pointing the joints a little bit more challenging, but we'll see how all of that goes. That looks a lot nicer to work with than normal concrete.
This is mortar.
Yeah, the mortar looks like peanut butter. The thickness of it, at least.
I don't know if I want to eat great peanut butter.
Don't dye it brown, someone might eat it.
Be some very interesting peanut butter.
Let's talk about the mix ratios for the mortar we used. The masons wanted to use a richer Portland cement mix to increase the tackiness and workability with the natural stone, which isn't as easy to bond to as manufactured stone or brick. The Lehigh Type S mortar we used is the base of the mixture, which is a premix of sand, Portland cement, and lime. It calls for the addition of more sand at a ratio of 2 to 3 parts sand to 1 part Type S, but the guys mixed at around a 1-to-1 of sand and Type S with about a trowel of Portland added. There's a balance with mixing that always trades off strength, workability, and cured brittleness, so this is where some experience does help. When we move on to grouting, an exact mix is much more important for color purposes, so we only mix within the exact guidelines on the Type S bag.
Yesterday?
In areas we knew the base coat of mortar would dry before we could get the next stone on, we used a tool to scratch it up for better adhesion. After starting to put stone on myself, I was really glad we used this method rather than doing a full scratch coat. I'll demonstrate why in a little bit. Our stone ledges were 2 inch by 3 inch to start, and after mocking it up, they stuck out a little too far compared to the thin veneer. It both looked weird and seemed too heavy to be hanging off the wall. So we decided to build a basic wooden jig to hold them and ripped 3/4 inch off the back edge. Brees did most of the hard work while I measured, marked, and moved the pieces.
Every once in a while you gotta set that saw down.
Oh yeah, I'm sure your back's killing you.
It is.
Then I started fabricating our proprietary cutting-edge design ledge support blocks.
It's the end of another day of stone veneer, and we got a pretty good bit done today. I think mainly because Elaine and I were helping the guys. I'm not sure how they felt about us helping, but we got about 4 times the amount of square footage coverage in previous days when they worked by themselves. So I think it helped a little bit, and we're paying these guys hourly, so it's definitely helping our pocketbook to get this going. But the work is looking just fine. I mean, we're not professional masons, but after a few stones, you kind of get the hang of it. I'm finding, after I kind of watch them do it, the task is much less intimidating. I think in any future stone veneer project, we're just gonna do it ourselves. It does help to have their tool set. He's got this big Husqvarna saw, which we use to trim our ledge stones down. I'll show you those up closer in a second, but I would have had to buy one of those saws. It's like 1,500 bucks probably. And it's certainly nice having some experienced guys on tap when it comes to like the ratios for mixing the mortar and stuff. Here's the progress up close. So before they had done where the mortar is light here, and I think they were getting really bent out of shape on the thickness of the stones. They're trying to keep them all at like exactly the same plane, but they do vary in thickness. It's a natural stone, it's split at different thicknesses. And so they were packing out the stones like with a lot of mortar. And I basically just said, listen, we can't be spending, you know, a day to do 20 square foot of stone. That's just too much money. So we started just basically applying it straight to the mesh, and honestly, it looks great. I like the variation in thickness. When we do the pointing joints, we're only gonna point to the thickness of the lower stone. So you'll see some of the edge of these thicker stones, but that's okay with me. I mean, I think that's gonna look fine. And I kind of like the variation in the wall. When it's all the same exact flatness, I think kind of looks fake, to be honest. And it's natural stone, so the idea is it looks real and natural. This is what we decided on to hold the ledge stones up, at least just in place right now. They're not mortared in yet, but I ripped a 2x4 at a 5-degree angle on the one edge, and then just used a little piece of 1x strip cut just about 1/2 inch or so wider than the stone ledges themselves. And that really holds them really nicely right at the exact spot underneath this drip cap. And we'll be able to basically just mortar the back of them and set them in place, and it can be left there to cure. Even just sitting dry, they're actually quite straight. And I think once we get mortar behind them, we'll run a string line from one to the other to do all the fine tuning and any shimming or anything that's necessary. But they're nice, they're sitting at that nice 5-degree angle for shedding water. That'll look really nice when it's all said and done. What are you doing?
Strumming a guitar.
See, strumming our ledge. Having these little temporary wooden ledges is going to help us be able to put large stones right up underneath, so we're not piecing little tiny bits of stone right underneath if we took the large stones, you know, an inch or so below them. So I think this is going to make the final product look a lot nicer, a little bit more effort putting the wooden blocks up, but it'll be worth it. You saw the one that's a little bit narrower, right?
This one looks a little narrow too, but this is not marked as narrow.
The guys have left for the day, so Elaine and I are gonna work on getting the remainder of these up so that we can hit the ground running first thing in the morning. And that way we can knock out all the ledges tomorrow. To try to help with the adhesion on these ledge stones, we're also scoring the back. I'm just using my angle grinder and putting like an 1/8 inch deep score at an angle every few inches. Not sure how much it's gonna really help, but it's a nice smooth like saw cut face on the backs of these. It doesn't seem like it's gonna bond that well to this natural stone. So any amount of surface texture or roughing the surface up, I think is gonna help. That's why we're scoring it with the angle grinder. That thing is a beast. I've never run one of these saws before, but it spins that blade up so fast it feels like a gyroscope, like it's like trying to like slowly turn this thing because of how heavy and fast that blade's spinning. But it goes through this stone like nothing. We're gonna try to heat treat these somehow. It's got a little burn mark on it. Probably wouldn't have done that if I used water. But the saw cut edge is kind of ugly just because it's so flat and smooth. To match the rest of the finish, I know they take like a big propane blowtorch and sort of burn off all the surface of the cut stone. And so I'm gonna try to do something similar here. I'm not sure how well it's gonna work. I'm gonna test it on one of these scraps first to see if it does work, but that is how we're going to try to like make this look good again.
This morning we're getting started on the ledges, actually getting them all mortared in. Strung a string line all the way down to that end to help us get all the corners lined up nice and straight. Kind of hard to tell on camera, but it's looking pretty darn good. Hopefully we can get all the ledges wrapped up by lunchtime or so, and then we can start getting stone up to it. We want to get some stones kind of supporting up underneath the ledge before we take these blocks out, because it is quite a heavy piece of stone on not a whole lot of surface area. So being able to support it with some stone from underneath will help it from sagging. Where needed, we're just throwing some shims in just to get this nice and straight, mocked up the corners here. And because these are both beveled at 5 degrees, the corner joints aren't precisely straight. So what we're going to do is, before we go ahead and point this, we'll just take the angle grinder and run it in to shave off these bottom edges, so this is a nice plumb looking joint, and it will be perfect for the corner. This little propane bottle torch just did not have the power to scale the surface of the stone, so we had to ditch this idea.
I don't have the bricklayer's technique down yet for putting mason.
You'll get it.
It's hard.
It took me 66 years to learn how to do this. I still don't know how.
Is that how old you are? 66?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I hope to be going as hard as you at 66.
I'm going to live to be 120, so.
Yep, you're just halfway there.
Mark's only 35. Look how he
I know, he's aged well. What's your secret, Mark? Plenty of cigarettes and coffee.
Yeah, back.
I got the string.
Okay, drop your line and put that back in where it needs to be. Get it.
After we have it parged behind where the ledges are gonna go and get a 1/2 or 3 stick of mud on the back of the ledge, we'll stick it in here. 1.5 inches or so is what it should be sticking out from the flashing. On the long stretches, we put strings to make that easy to do. We didn't have to measure every one, but this little standalone piece between our garage doors can easily measure. Oh, and I'm sticking my 2-foot level on, making sure it's nice and level. Then I'm gonna be sort of going side to side, and I'm looking for squeeze out. Do one last little sanity check to make sure we're about even on each side. Good enough for government work. That sun definitely sets this stuff up quick.
Yep.
Now the breeze is picking up too. It's even, it's double whammy. Bottom edge.
I would not be doing
What's that?
that made me so nervous. I'm like, you're
The end of another day. We got a pretty good amount done today. I'm happy with it. I didn't get a ton of film because I was helping do all the stonework today as well, but you can see we've gotten this whole wall basically done except for where all of the little blocks are holding up the ledge. We got all the ledges on this morning too before lunch, which is awesome. That was a big hurdle to get through those ledges, and that created basically our picture frame that we now have to fill in. The challenging part with the ledges is that it is quite a heavy piece of stone, and we have to be careful about when we can take our little support blocks off. So our idea was to run stone up to at least some portion of each one of the 3-foot ledge pieces, and then pack some mortar in above that stone, or at least put a shim or something in there, and then we can pull this off and fill in with the rest of the stone. And then once we put the pointing in, or the mortar in between all the stones, kind of like the grout, it should be good to go from there. These turned out nice and straight. Using the string definitely helped. We, threw some shims in here as needed just to raise it up little bits and pieces. These were not mounted like any special way. We basically just held it up and screwed this in. So sometimes they were a little bit off. So in order to keep the stones even, some needed shims. We kept the joints probably about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch each. That should be plenty to get some mortar in there. Brees and Mark did this whole section, which looks good, And then I basically did this whole section, which I think still looks pretty good for basically a complete amateur doing all this. There are definitely some nuances and tricks to stonemasonry, but with this mosaic stuff, really the best trick you can have is being good at puzzles, because that's essentially what this feels like, fitting together a giant homemade jigsaw puzzle and making it look good. So every now and then I'll kind of just like stand back, look at the wall, make sure we don't have too many tiny pieces and too many big pieces in the same area. I'm sure there's other technical ways to make stone veneer look good, but a lot of it's just making the stones fit. Today is Friday and the guys are not going to be working this weekend, and it's actually a holiday weekend, Labor Day weekend, so they're not coming back till Tuesday. I'm going to be working on this hard myself all weekend. Maybe I'll get Elena to come help a little bit if I'm lucky, but I am going to try to get this whole front side done, so it's these 3 little mini pillars in the front, and then finish up the side that we're almost done with. Take off the support blocks and infill everything underneath of them. I want to let these ledges cure for at least a full day. So we got them on by like noon today. I don't want to take any off really tomorrow if I don't have to. There's still tons of work to be done before having to take any of these off. So it'll probably be Sunday before I remove any of the blocks, but even when I do, I'll make sure I have a stone up underneath of it that I can shim, because I don't want this thing sagging or breaking off. Although when I feel like the mortar underneath, we put a fillet joint on each one of these underneath to kind of like help create a little shelf to support it, and it feels pretty darn solid. So my hopes are high that these will do well, but time will tell. So it's just me today, and my goal is to get most of that front elevation done. It's 3 small pillars and one of them wraps around a corner. These are, I think, harder than the larger wall areas because you're in such a small constraint and you're trying to make these mosaic stones fit. I'm starting off by picking out my stones. I've got them all sort of laid out. I want the thickest and nicest stones up front, and we want ones that have a little bit of brown tones as well, because this stone was supposed to be kind of a mix of gray and brown, but really it's mostly gray now that we're looking at it. So there is some brown. I'm trying to find those, and then I'll put them all out front so I know exactly what set of stones I can choose from when laying that mosaic out. Alina helped me lay this palette out, and the strategy was like long skinny rectangles sort of here, some larger stuff here, and then medium to small stuff up in the top. One thing I also need to keep in mind is we have a lot of straight edges in these little squares up front, so I need stones with straight edges to at least get close to the jambs. That's a beauty. I'm basically all prepped out front with stone, but it's sunny out there now and I really don't want to sit in the sun and work, and also it dries out the mortar really quickly. So I'm back on the back side, and I decided I'm going to just work back here until the sun moves over here, and then I'll go out front and finish that up. But I got a few pieces up just with one small batch of mortar, and I want to talk about the mortar real quick that we're mixing up. We basically have 4 main ingredients in this mix. The first and primary being Lehigh Type S masonry cement. That contains Portland cement, sand, and lime, and it's kind of a pre-blended mix. But the masons also wanted to add another ingredient, which is just straight Portland cement. It makes the mix a lot tackier and stickier. They also claim that it makes it more resistant to water getting behind the stones. Regular masonry sand is the 3rd major ingredient, and then this water is the 4th. And for the mix to stick these stones on the wall, we're going a little bit thinner than, say, like peanut butter. Just enough to barely stick on the trowel, but not too thick that it's tough to trowel out onto the wall. The application technique of sort of scratch coating as we go, or more like applying it like tile, is definitely a little bit non-traditional, but the masons have also said they've seen a lot of failures, and almost always it's because of improper bonding between a scratch coat and the glob of mortar behind the stone when it tries to stick to the scratch coat. They claim that this is going to be a much more robust solution. I'm not 100% sure because I really don't know, but I feel like they're probably right because of just the fact of no cold joint between the stone and then the wire match, which is the true foundation for what the stone is hanging off of. The The sun has finally moved over to the other side, but before I get too busy on the shaded side here, I want to get this massive corner block on here. I found that doing all the corners and the jambs are really the way to go because it gives you the true frame that you have to work within in these small sections. And that's important if we're trying to get large stones in here to support this ledge. So getting this corner piece in is kind of critical to doing the rest that's all in the shade. Let's go ahead and do that. Quick note on fastener spacing for our wire mesh. Most guidance I've seen says 6 inches everywhere, like a grid of 6 inch. I have these number 10 by 2.5 inch screws going into studs. I wanted to make sure I was fastening the studs. I just was trying to minimize my holes into the WRB, the weather resistant barrier, which in this case is our zip sheathing. But there are places that I think could use a little bit more fastening, especially in these little pillars where we don't have that many studs and we're gonna be hanging some pretty big stones, like right here. In those cases, I'm just gonna take some galvanized roofing nails and put those in. In general, I didn't really want to put them 6 inches everywhere. It just felt like a heck of a lot of holes. And once all of these stones are sort of on here and grouted together and acting as kind of a wall, I really don't see that being heavy enough to like pull these big screws and washers out of the studs. It's just a heck of a lot of weight. And I also can't imagine it would like shear the heads off either, especially because these are stainless and they're not going to corrode. But that is just one quick note. I think if you're doing kind of the standard application, electro galvanized or hot dip galvanized roofing nails everywhere, put them 6 inches everywhere. But in our case with the stainless screws and washers, I'm being a little bit less liberal with the fastening to try to keep the holes in the WRB at a minimum. Our little stone picker has oh, and she's got Dorito snacks. Great. She's eating on the job. She has selected the next stone, which is going to be that guy, and we're going to put that right up underneath the ledge. I think I'm going to break my rule of doing all the jambs first because that is a beauty of a stone. It's got some brown in it, which we like up front, and we need some support under this ledge before we take these blocks out. So we're going to basically set that right here. We don't have really hardly anything except for just the corner of that supporting underneath of it. I'm going to take a stick to support the other end down from this guy. And we're gonna get that, it's kind of like the keystone almost to the front center of our facade. So we wanna make sure we get that right. All right, it's the moment of truth to take these two out so we can get a long block underneath our ledge. So put that clamp on the left side there, and I'm screwing a block onto our temporary jamb here to kind of accomplish the same thing, give this ledge a little bit of support. I'm not even sure if it needs this, to be honest. I'm gonna take the precaution anyway, because if this breaks off, we're in trouble. Oh! You scared me.
Did I scare you?
No, you didn't scare me. The bottom edge of it.
Just to make sure I like it.
Just to make sure she likes it, I'm gonna hold it up.
Oh yeah. I think that's good.
She thinks it's good, she likes it, she approves.
Do it.
Cutting a right angle on her. I found the easiest way to cut these stones is a 4-inch blade on this angle grinder. The key though is not leaving a saw cut visible after you've grouted it, because saw cuts just look ugly on this natural stone, which has no completely straight edges. So what I'm doing is cutting from the back like 3/4 the way through, basically scoring it, and then taking a hammer and that last quarter of the thickness, just chipping it so it breaks naturally and it leaves sort of a jagged edge, but it's right along the line that you want it to be. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This guy needs to be a right angle to fit underneath the ledge and go up against the door jamb. I'm going to cut just this little sliver off here, but I'm going to mark it from the back side and score on the back side.
I later learned that I was hammering the wrong direction on the stone, which is what caused the chip out on the front.
Certainly not
It's a
perfect.
lot better if you flip it the other way.
Did take the front edge of this off a little bit. It still looks like a natural stone edge, which is what the goal was. When we get our pointing joints in, you won't be able to tell that this was actually a saw cut edge. Looks nice and natural. That was a good day of work yesterday. Got quite a bit of the front up. We're gonna finish that. Now that this is finally coming into the shade today, it's definitely a scorching hot day out today. So do not wanna be working in the sun if at all possible. So I'm over here around the side, starting to take these bounce off here. We've had a couple days of cure time on the ledges, so I feel pretty good about taking them off, the ones that had mortar packed underneath with a stone directly beneath them. This is getting tricky though, because these are pretty small areas to fill, and so I'm really having to get creative in either finding the right stones or cutting a custom stone. So I find that cutting seems to yield the best results. Here's kind of my technique. In a spot like this where we already have a bunch of tiny stones, I don't want to infill with more tiny stones. So instead I'm going to cut a T-shaped stone to sort of fit that. And I'm using this guy right here, a cardboard template that I cut out to mock up exactly where I need a stone, and then finding a decent stone that will fit that I can cut out. If I can find a stone that's roughly the same like general size and height, like that one's almost exactly the right height with close to some of the same features, maybe I can even get those angles to line up a little bit better. All I really need to do is cut out that and do this kind of jagged cut up the side, and that stone should fit where I need it to fit. There she is. It fits, and I actually screwed this one up though because I didn't mark which side of the T was the front, so I actually did all the saw cuts from the front, and that is not what you want. You do not want to see this exposed. Either way, when I hit the thing, it pretty much broke clean through. This is not a great example, but this jagged edge is supposed to be what's exposed. It was supposed to be like that. Instead, it's like this. So the sharper, straighter, cleaner cuts are what's going to be exposed. We're going to put a pointing joint right up to this, and we can try to disguise it a little bit, but ideally you don't want these smooth straight lines when we're doing natural stone because everything else is jagged. That was a mistake on my part, but I will definitely remember that for the future to mark the front. I don't think it looks that bad. I don't think it's worth redoing this over, but just something to learn going forward. Even though this is kind of a non-traditional method of doing stone veneer, not doing the scratch coat first, I am really happy now that I'm putting some of these up myself that we're doing it this way, because I can actually feel the difference in adhesion of the wet joint versus the dry cold joint. This parge just completely sucks the water out of this stuff in like 2 seconds. Like, check that out. Imagine there's a stone on that, and within seconds that scratch coat has sucked the moisture out of this. Now look, it scrapes off like dust, and you can see how much water it's sucked out of there in the meantime. Now that's why the stone sticks so well initially to that scratch coat, but there's been a couple where I've had to do a slight adjustment to the position of it within 10 or 15 seconds of sticking it, and the stone just falls right off because there's no real bond at that point. And when I try to make the same adjustment on something that's on just wet mortar troweled right onto the wire mesh, first of all, it slides around, but if I ever try to pull it off, it is like pulling a suction cup off this wall. I mean, it does not want to come off. And I can only imagine that once it dries, it's even more stuck on there. The masons have even talked about how they've seen applications with the standard scratch and stick method, and they sometimes will only go maybe 5-10 years before their stone's popping off because of freeze-thaw cycles, because water gets in between the scratch coat and the stick coat, freeze-thaw, and then all of a sudden it pops the stone free of the rest of them. That's obviously worst case scenario, but I feel like this method is a little bit more robust.
The mic died, but I said even if it does take a little bit more time.
It's a new day and we're getting it done this afternoon. We finished up all of the gaps above this wall, so there's just a couple more little slivers to do there, I think. I'm about to do a cardboard template for the corner piece here, and Lana will find me a little square for that guy. In the meantime, I have her disassembling all the little ledge supports because we don't waste screws around here. Nope, one of those buckets of screws is like 35 bucks. Not throwing those babies away. For some of these tricky areas, the cardboard template method really cannot be beat. Like, this corner is not only wrapping a corner, but there's like some weird angles involved. I'll make the right piece out of cardboard, and then I can easily mark the corner to be cut. Stone veneer is kind of nice because it's not like tile, for example, which relies on insane amounts of precision and accuracy. Stone veneer is a little bit more art. You're a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch off, you can pretty much get away with it, honestly.
You say that before pointing.
And there's my stone. Now I should be able to snap it. Yeah, I only had to saw cut that little bit. Ah! Wait, oh, we're good. Oh, it did break it. It broke this off.
What?
I didn't mean to do that.
What did it break?
Oh, wait, no.
No, didn't it? It's
No, we're
fine.
good.
That's where you cut it an angle.
That already broke. Maybe it just fell off the table and I thought it broke. False alarm.
Why don't you set it down and...
No, because I'm supposed to go the other way, remember? That's how you get it to not fracture all the face off. It is going this way.
Okay. Why don't you set it down then?
No, because holding it absorbs the impact so that it doesn't accidentally chip that off. Now I broke it. See, that wasn't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
I got what I wanted to break off.
I think you needed to cut deeper. You still had about half the stone.
Darn. That's a bummer.
Check out this cool spider. I'm not sure what kind of spider that is, but it's got a lot of really cool coloring. Second time's a charm.
Round 2 went better. This one's good because I don't need a spacer over there. I was gonna have to fill that. So I'm actually happy. That was a happy accident, as Bob Ross says. Stop. As we're taking our braces out, I decided a good idea would be to plug the hole from the screw with a little roofing nail. That'll look good, don't you think?
Yeah.
A little bit of white.
Yeah, I like the white.
I think I need to hold it up kind of like this.
And just
I don't really like this one because it's like,
pack the mortar behind. Maybe
it's
the
like
one
a
that you
weird
just cut.
shape. Weirdly comes out too far here. It's not sticking out over the ledge.
I was proud that Elena picked up the templating technique really easily. I think it tapped into her past artistic background for sculpture. The one downfall of the templating technique though is it's easy to get too precise with it and you end up cutting the stone too tight and you don't have enough joint room for getting grout in between the stones.
We're down to the last stone, which Brees just cut. It's 1:45 in the afternoon and it is hot. And check out our extremely expensive tent. Some 2x4s clamped in the bucket with a little tarp over it, trying to keep us somewhat cool. It's like 91 degrees out here right now. But we're gonna have some stone left over too, which is cool. Maybe about 10, 20 square foot. Maybe you can do a little porch paver or something like that with what we have left. Who knows, we'll figure it out. Brees is working on that one, but I lied. This is going to be the very last stone. Still got to trim her down, but boom, something just like that.